Ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk to you today about something that hits deep for so many of us. How do you know when God is telling you it's time to let go of someone? Because sometimes letting go isn't easy. It doesn't make sense in the moment, but God has a way of revealing things to us that we can't see on our own. And let me tell you, there are moments in life when He's showing you that it's time to move on. When unhealthy patterns persist in a relationship, it's more than just a red flag, it's a wake-up call. We've all been there. You pour everything you have into someone, but despite your best efforts, nothing changes. It's as though you're stuck in a loop, repeating the same hurtful behaviors, miscommunications, or disappointments over and over again. At some point, this repetitive cycle stops being about a mistake or misunderstanding and starts becoming something deeper, a pattern that doesn't align with the growth and peace that God has planned for you. Unhealthy patterns are often difficult to recognize at first. In the beginning, relationships may start off with excitement, hope, and promises of change. People may seem sincere, and it's easy to believe that things will improve if you keep trying. But over time, if certain behaviors continue to surface, whether it's lies, manipulation, neglect, disrespect, or even abuse, it's no longer a series of unfortunate events. It's a behavior pattern. These aren't just isolated incidents. They are habits that define the relationship, and they will not magically disappear if ignored. When you see this happening, God might be showing you that change isn't coming, not because He doesn't have the power to change people, but because He's giving you the clarity to see the situation for what it is. There's a difference between someone making a mistake and someone consistently repeating the same mistakes without any effort to correct them. God doesn't want you to stay in a relationship where the other person isn't willing to take responsibility for their actions, grow, or be accountable. Sometimes He lets you see the truth in these recurring behaviors so that you can decide if continuing is wise for your well-being. These persistent patterns can have a devastating impact on your spirit, your peace, and your emotional health. The problem isn't just the actions themselves, but the toll they take on you. If you're in a relationship where things continually go wrong, despite all your attempts to fix them, you begin to internalize a sense of failure, guilt, and frustration. You may even start to question your worth or your ability to make good choices. That's not God's will for your life. He's called you to be free, to experience joy, and to grow in peace. Not to be constantly battered by the same relational struggles. In some cases, unhealthy patterns become so normalized that we start to accept them as the way things are. We believe that we're just supposed to make it work, or that love means putting up with dysfunction. But real love, God's love, doesn't thrive in dysfunction. God doesn't want you to settle for a relationship that drags you down or keeps you in the same broken place year after year. He's called you to live in freedom, not in the chains of unhealthy patterns that bind you. It's important to recognize that God's grace and mercy extend to us all, and no one is beyond the power of transformation. But if someone refuses to acknowledge their issues or take responsibility for their actions, you're faced with a choice. Do you stay and continue trying to fix what's broken, or do you trust God's wisdom and step away, allowing Him to heal you and work in their life? Recognizing unhealthy patterns doesn't mean you're giving up on someone. It means you're giving up on the idea that you alone can fix things that only God can change. When your peace is consistently disrupted by someone, it's not just a small problem, it's a signal that something deeper is at work. Peace is one of the most precious gifts God gives us. It's a peace that surpasses understanding, a peace that grounds us in His presence, even when life is chaotic. And yet, when you find yourself constantly on edge, stressed, anxious, or unsettled because of a relationship, that's a warning. Your peace is being disturbed. And that's a problem. Because peace is not just a feeling, it's an indication that you are aligned with God's will and His presence. God's peace is a stabilizing force. It doesn't mean everything is perfect, but it does mean that regardless of circumstances, you're able to stand firm knowing that He's in control. But when someone or something begins to constantly rob you of that peace, it means there's a disconnect. Maybe it's because the relationship is full of drama, confusion, or conflict that never seems to resolve. Maybe it's because the dynamics are unhealthy and you feel emotionally drained or manipulated. Or maybe it's because you're being pulled in a direction that doesn't align with what God is calling you to. In a relationship, when peace is disrupted, it can begin to affect every area of your life. The anxiety that starts to seep into your thoughts can make it difficult to focus. Your spirit feels unsettled, and no matter how hard you try to shake it off, you can't. The emotional toll of someone constantly disturbing your peace can eventually wear you down, leading to physical exhaustion, mental burnout, and a strained relationship with God. You find yourself praying for peace, but it feels like that peace never fully settles in. Instead, it's always on the verge of being shattered again by the same person, the same toxic behavior, or the same unresolved issues. God calls us to live in peace and to let that peace guard our hearts and minds. When peace is being disrupted, it's a sign that something isn't right. Peace doesn't just mean a lack of conflict. It means the presence of God's will, trust, and assurance. If someone continuously pulls you out of that peace, that person may not be in alignment with the life God has planned for you. Sometimes it's not about that person intentionally causing harm, but rather the nature of the relationship itself is incompatible with the peace you need to live out the purpose God has for you. The moment your peace starts to feel like a distant memory, you have to pay attention. It's not normal to live in a state of constant emotional upheaval, always on edge, never knowing if things will be calm for just a moment. God didn't create us to live like that. He created us to experience His peace, peace that stabilizes, nurtures, and strengthens us. If someone or something consistently steals that peace, it might be time to reassess that relationship. Maybe it's time to step back, take a breath, and listen to what God is telling you about the role that person plays in your life. Peace is a sign of God's presence. And when that peace is disrupted, it's a chance to refocus, evaluate, and realign yourself with His purpose. Disruption isn't just a minor inconvenience. It's a reminder that God wants you to have peace. And when you don't, it's worth examining the source of that disturbance. When you're more focused on someone's potential than their reality, you're living in a constant state of what could be rather than what is. This is a trap that many of us fall into, especially in relationships where we see great promise or imagine a future that's full of possibilities. It's natural to believe in someone's potential, to see the good in them, to envision how they could change, grow, or rise to their best self. But sometimes in doing so, we lose sight of the reality of who they are right now in the present moment. God calls us to love people for who they are, not just who we hope they'll become. And while there's nothing wrong with hoping for growth or change in the people we care about, it's dangerous to build our entire relationship on a dream of who they could be rather than the person they truly are. It's easy to get caught up in the vision we have for their life or the idea of what we can fix in them, but in the process, we often neglect to address the core issue, their current reality. It's important to understand that potential is about what someone could do in the future. It's not about who they are right now. Potential is an idea, a possibility, a hope for change. Reality, on the other hand, is the person in front of you, the actions they take, the choices they make, and the behaviors they consistently demonstrate. When you focus too much on potential, you allow yourself to overlook red flags, persistent flaws, or harmful behaviors that don't match up with the version of them you've created in your mind. You might forgive things you shouldn't, tolerate things you wouldn't, or settle for less than what God wants for you, simply because you're convinced that one day things will be different. But God doesn't want us to live in the land of one day. He wants us to be present, to walk in the truth of what is right in front of us. Potential is important, but it can never replace reality. God calls us to see things clearly, to walk in wisdom and discernment, not in blind hope or naive dreams. If you're consistently overlooking someone's flaws or unhealthy behaviors because of what you think they could be, you're setting yourself up for disappointment and heartache. Relationships based solely on potential are built on shaky ground. What's dangerous about focusing too much on potential is that it often leads to self-deception. You start convincing yourself that someone will change if only you stick around, or that they'll eventually come around to be the person you believe they can be. You get emotionally invested in a future that doesn't yet exist. And in doing so, you ignore the truth of who they are in the present moment. God is not blind to the future, but he is concerned with your present. He wants you to understand the difference between loving someone for who they are today and waiting around for a version of them that may never come. While God can change people, he also gives us wisdom to know when to wait and when to walk away. When you're more focused on someone's potential than their reality, you are no longer acting in wisdom. You're operating in hope, but not the kind of hope that is grounded in the truth of God's word and his timing. It's essential to recognize the balance between loving someone and holding space for their growth and getting trapped in an illusion of who they could be if they just change. If you're waiting on the future instead of engaging with the present, you risk losing sight of your own purpose and well-being in the process. There's a difference between a relationship that uplifts and one that leaves you feeling drained. When you're in a healthy, life-giving relationship, you feel energized. Even when the challenges arise, there's an undercurrent of joy and peace that sustains you. But when you're being drained instead of energized, it's not just a temporary fatigue. It's a deeper, ongoing exhaustion that touches every part of your being. When you're consistently giving and giving to someone but receiving nothing in return, it's like trying to pour from an empty cup. Initially, you might not notice the toll it's taking. You tell yourself that it's normal to sacrifice for others, that love is about giving selflessly, and that relationships are meant to require effort. And while that's true to some extent, it's also true that relationships should be reciprocal. When you are constantly giving of your time, energy, emotions, and resources, but the other person is either taking without offering anything back or not making any effort to meet you halfway, the imbalance becomes unsustainable. You begin to feel like you're running on empty with nothing left to give, yet the demands on you never stop. This type of relationship doesn't just drain you physically, it drains you emotionally and spiritually. It chips away at your sense of self-worth and erodes your sense of purpose. You start to feel like you're nothing more than a resource for the other person, and your needs, your desires, your dreams, your well-being fall to the background. You become caught in a cycle of trying to meet their needs while ignoring your own, and in the process, you lose sight of who you are and what God has called you to be, and ultimately, you lose control of the truth you were chosen to be. God designed us for connection, but he also designed us to live in balance. We're meant to lift one another up, to encourage and strengthen each other. But when you're being drained rather than filled up, something is wrong. It's not just that you're tired, it's that you're not being nurtured in the way that you need. There's no mutual exchange of love, support, or care. Instead, you're left feeling depleted, as though your very presence in the relationship is being taken for granted. This exhaustion can begin to manifest in other areas of your life as well. You might notice that you're more irritable, less focused, or that you're withdrawing from other relationships. The emotional weight you're carrying is affecting your ability to be present, to enjoy other aspects of your life, and to pursue your own goals. What's meant to be a partnership is no longer a source of joy. It has become a burden. You may even find yourself wondering, why am I doing this? Why am I putting so much into someone who doesn't seem to care? God has called you to live with purpose, to use the gifts he's given you to bless others, but not to the point of losing yourself. If a relationship is consistently draining you, it's a sign that you need to reassess whether it's truly healthy for you. God doesn't call us to be in relationships that deplete our energy and undermine our peace. He calls us to walk alongside one another, to love and encourage, not to pour ourselves out until there's nothing left. Frankly, being drained is a sign that the relationship is not balanced, and that imbalance can prevent you from being able to live the life God has called you to. It's not selfish to want to protect your own emotional and spiritual well-being. It's necessary. If you find yourself constantly exhausted, it's important to take a step back and assess whether this relationship is truly life-giving or whether it's time to let go for the sake of your own health and growth. Okay? Growth is an essential part of life. It's woven into the fabric of our spiritual, emotional, and personal development. In every season, God is calling us to evolve, to become more of the person He created us to be. But sometimes the very relationships that we hold dear can become a barrier to that growth. They can tie us down, keep us stagnant, and prevent us from stepping into the fullness of who God has designed us to be. When a relationship is preventing you from growing, you start to notice that you're stuck in a cycle. There's a sense of being tethered to the past, to patterns of behavior that limit your progress. Whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, or even a family connection, if it's preventing you from growing, you're constantly in a state of imbalance. You might find that you're not advancing in your goals, your purpose feels unclear, or your spiritual life feels stagnant. Instead of moving forward, you feel like you're stuck in neutral, spinning your wheels but not gaining any traction. God has a purpose for your life, and that purpose involves growth. Growth in your faith, growth in your character, growth in your impact. If someone in your life is constantly holding you back from that, whether intentionally or not, it becomes a serious issue. Sometimes this can happen because the other person is insecure about your growth. They may feel threatened by your progress or by the changes you're making in your life. They may want you to stay the same because it serves their needs, but in doing so, they create an environment where you can't flourish. Instead of encouraging you to chase your dreams and pursue God's calling for your life, they might hold you back, either through manipulation, control, or subtle criticism. In other cases, a relationship can prevent growth by fostering negative behaviors that influence your mindset. If you're constantly surrounded by pessimism, doubt, or negativity, it becomes harder to move forward in faith. You start to doubt your own abilities, question your worth, and lose sight of the dreams and passions God has placed inside of you. Instead of being around people who lift you up, encourage you, and push you toward your best self, you find yourself in a relationship that reinforces your fears and insecurities rather than your confidence and potential. There's also the danger of relationships that demand so much of your time, energy, or attention that you have no space left to grow in your own life. When you're constantly pouring into someone else's needs, you might begin to neglect your own. Your relationship might be draining you emotionally, leaving you with little to invest in your personal growth. Whether it's taking care of someone who refuses to take responsibility for their own life or sacrificing your own dreams for the sake of someone else's comfort, your growth becomes secondary. And over time, that takes a toll on your sense of purpose and fulfillment. God calls us to relationships that support and encourage our growth, not relationships that keep us stagnant or limit our potential. Sometimes, in order to grow into the person God has created us to be, we have to make difficult decisions about the people we allow in our lives. If a relationship is consistently pulling you away from God's calling or preventing you from becoming the best version of yourself, it's time to seriously evaluate whether it's the right relationship for this season of your life. Growth requires space to evolve, to take risks, to fail and try again. A relationship that keeps you bound to the past or restricts your potential will only hold you back from becoming who God has called you to be. There are moments in life when you feel an unexplainable pull, a stirring deep in your spirit, telling you that it's time to let go. This feeling often comes when logic and reason aren't enough to explain what's happening. You can't point to a specific incident or a clear-cut reason why, but something within you knows that holding on any longer is not part of the plan God has for your life. This pull is not always easy to understand, but it's an unmistakable prompting that calls for action. Action that might seem difficult or uncomfortable in the moment, but is often necessary for your peace, growth, and obedience to God's will. So this pull is subtle yet powerful. It doesn't come with a clear list of reasons or a neatly packaged explanation. It's a quiet conviction, a nudge in your heart that tells you it's time to move forward, even if you don't fully understand why. You might be in a relationship that's no longer healthy, or you might be tied to a situation that's draining your energy and spirit. The pull doesn't always make sense from a worldly perspective, especially when there's no obvious cause for concern. Everything might appear fine on the surface, but deep down, something doesn't feel right. Can you think of too many times where you felt that way? This is where faith comes into play. God doesn't always reveal the full picture all at once. Sometimes he guides you through feelings, circumstances, or situations that seem vague, but if you're willing to listen, he's providing you with the discernment you need. The unexplainable pull to let go isn't about understanding all the details. It's about trusting that God knows what's best for you, even when you don't have all the answers. The hardest part is often choosing to follow that pull. It requires faith to act on something that doesn't make sense in the moment. You may try to rationalize it, talk yourself out of it, or convince yourself that you're overreacting. But deep down, you know that ignoring the pull will only keep you stuck. It's a feeling that keeps coming back, a whisper that gets louder until you can no longer ignore it. It's the moment when you realize that by holding on, you might be preventing God from leading you into the next chapter of your life. There's also an emotional weight that comes with this pull. Letting go, especially if someone or something you've invested time, energy, and love into, feels like a loss. It's a decision that can stir up fear, uncertainty, and heartache. You might worry about the impact it will have on your life or on the lives of others. But this pull to let go is often a sign that God is calling you to step into something greater. Holding on too tightly to what's no longer serving you can block the flow of what God has in store. He's not asking you to give up on the person, but rather to let go of the unhealthy attachment, the expectations, or the control that you've placed on the situation. This unexplainable pull to let go is not about abandonment, it's about release. It's about trusting that God's plan for your future is far better than what you can see in the present moment. When you let go, you create space for God to do his work, for new opportunities to open, and for healing to take place. It's a step of faith that may not make sense to anyone else, but it's exactly what you need to move forward in your purpose and walk in the fullness of what God has for you. In life, we often face moments where God calls us to release certain relationships for our growth, peace, and purpose. Whether it's recognizing unhealthy patterns, feeling drained, or realizing that someone's potential is clouding your reality, it's important to trust God's guidance when peace is disrupted, growth is hindered, or an unexplainable pull arises. These are signs he's leading you to let go. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means trusting God's plan and making space for the future he has for you. Trust that when God leads you to release, it's because he's preparing something better.